Welcome to the Reschool'd podcast, the show that discusses all the things that schools may have missed, with your hosts AJ Kuti and Jason Gordon. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the show. We are the Reschool'd podcast, the show that discusses the things that schools may not have prepared you for. As always, I am AJ. Across from me, sitting, I guess, on the screen across from me, Jason. Jason, how you doing?
Doing great, AJ.
Man, okay, so I'm going to give the listeners a little bit of behind the scenes of what's going on. So, Jason and I had a meeting yesterday. We had a meeting for our school, and to tell you, one of the things about this show is we're very two different people. Like, he's very focused on academics, I was more on the fun side, yada yada yada. We know we're polar opposites, more or less. But yesterday during our meeting, I saw it more than I think I ever have, because I came into the meeting, which was this big, seminar, I guess you would say, in shorts and like a fishing shirt, and you came in with khakis and a button down, looking all professional, and it just reassured me how different we are.
Well, in that way, AJ, I have not always been the snazziest dresser, I can tell you that. So yesterday, I had to, during the lunch hour, present to some businesses who are connected with the college and things like that. So I had to look a little better than normal. So I am not afraid these days to dress down a bit, and that has been something that has been consistent throughout my career.
Yeah, I'm not somebody that dresses up a lot. If I can get away with it, I won't.
Well, I do a series in my class on professionalism about professional dress and things like that, and we're going to talk about that in a later episode, just, the benefits, the downsides, considerations, things like that. But I will say this, there are times when you need to dress up and times when you can fit in with the crowd by dressing down, and both of them are important, right? Because once again, fitting in, being part of what everyone expects can be a big part of your success in that way at some points in times. But like I said, that's a topic for a different episode.
What do they say? You're supposed to dress for the job that you want?
They say that.
How do you dress like Batman?
Oh, you're going to show up? Yeah.
Just dress up in like Batman.
Show up in an astronaut suit, yeah, right? But I'm going to be the next Bezos going up
exactly,
in a reusable rocket. So, so maybe if I want to work at Tesla, I need to, dress.
Start dressing like Elon.
Yeah, like Elon, or I don't guess Tim Cook pulls off the old Steve Jobs look.
No, you can't. You got to have the turtleneck. I don't think you can pull that one off. Well, on today's episode, we are going to be talking about the pros and cons of living on campus versus living off campus. This is something that all students have to deal with, regardless of where you're going to school. If the school's in your hometown, if it's away, you're going to have to make a decision if you're going to live on campus, live off campus. Sometimes the decision is easier than others, but I feel like it's really necessary for us to go through this and help the listeners understand that there is a difference, and there are pros and cons to both. So does it sound good to you?
Absolutely. Well, and this decision stays there throughout college, and your considerations kind of change one way or the other throughout. One, the variables, one becomes a little more important to you later on versus early on and things like that. So yeah, it's something important. It's gonna help people along and along. Before we jump into that, though, I want to remind everybody, revisit Reschool.com, our website. That's Reschool with a D, not an ED. Check out our social media handles. It's Reschool'd Pod on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, all those good things, and also your favorite podcasting app. Make sure you like us, get the notifications when we drop new episodes, which is, every week. Sometimes we have more than one a week for special episodes and things like that. So make certain to check that out. And again, if you have anything to tell us, successes, things you want to hear us talk about, use that contact form on the website. We're happy to communicate with you. We will talk about the things that you send to us. So get some information to us so we can hear about it.
Absolutely. Let's get into the quick question of the day. And this really deals with, living on campus versus living off campus and whatnot. But just from our personal experience, what would you say is the best amenity that you have seen when it comes to living on campus and also when it comes to living off campus?
Oh, fun rooms.
Fun
Definitely.
rooms. Okay.
Yeah, definitely fun rooms. And, it changes.
Like we're talking about game rooms, right?
Yeah, game rooms, leisure
rooms,
rec rooms, lounge rooms, whatever. I mean, some of them look like arcades. Some of them are more, academically inclined, just have computers and things like that, reading areas and stuff like that. But those are awesome places. It's some of them go so far as to be like kind of incubator, inventor, ideation
Oh, like
spaces
a
where you
maker
can.
space.
Yeah, I mean, they have your computers in there. They have green screen rooms, podcasting rooms, all that kind of stuff. So some of these colleges go overboard and just give you all these cool things that you can look forward to. Others, not so much, right? They think of it more as just here's an extra library you can go study, some whiteboards, things like that you can work with. But these rec rooms, they're pretty awesome.
And just to be clear, you have lived on campus and off campus, correct?
Yeah, I've had both experiences. And, even living off campus when I made the transition, there were times when I came back and spent a good bit of time on campus with friends who were still living on campus. And, there are different scenarios that you can live on campus. There's dorms, sometimes there's college rented houses where you can share that space with other people and things like that. So there's different formats on campus. And then, of course, off campus, there's any place where you can find a place to lay your head, right?
Well, and we're going to come back to that. I'm going to answer my quick question real quick, and that is, the best amenity I have, I guess my thoughts are kind of jaded in the sense because I didn't live on campus. I never lived on campus. My undergrad, I lived in the city that I grew up in, where my parents lived. So I lived off campus, but I did live with them for a vast majority of it, and then I also lived in a house on the side for a year. And so I can really only speak on the off-campus side. But I will say the best amenities I've seen just from my sense of college and what I would like to get out of college when I'm not in school, and that was easily the pools. The pools now at these apartment complexes or whatnot are unreal. I mean, they're a party in and of itself.
Oh, and they're the draw, right? I mean,
oh yeah.
People come from who don't even live there, right? Or coming just there for that purpose. So
absolutely. So I would say that would be my best amenity. All right, main topic time. And I think you just touched on this a little bit, but let's just go ahead and define the different options that you have when it comes to living on campus and also the options of living off campus. So I'll take the living off campus, and that is you can live in an apartment complex. I mean, that's a pretty common one. You can live in a house. You can rent a house or buy a house if you wanted to, but renting in a house. If you are like me, I lived in a city where my parents also lived. You can live with your parents, and I love that. I did that for 3 years. Didn't have a problem with it, and it saved me a lot of money, and I didn't have to cook as much. It was really nice. That's always one option. And, obviously there's variations of this. So, I mean, you can have, a cabin or whatever, but those are really the big areas when it comes to living off campus. So you have the apartment, renting a house, living with your parents. Can you think of another one that would fall into that living off campus category?
Well, I had a unique scenario where I just bummed on other people's couches for
couch surfed.
I was a couch surfer for about one full semester. So, you can make that work in a pinch.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've had friends when we had our house, we had friends that did that too. So, all right. So what are your options for living on campus?
Well, on campus, I would say there's your traditional dorms, right? And that's going to be like a honeycomb pod of, all these individual like suites. Normally they have it where you put, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 people in a group together, and you share a couple of bathrooms within the suite. And then they have kind of individual rooms popped off of each. Those have been the majority of dorms. Some of the older school dorms, like, there are universities out there that still, some of their dormitories date back to the, 50s, 60s, 70s, right? They haven't done any reconstruction. So oftentimes those are a little more these are just straight up rooms that 1 or 2 people go into type scenario. But all the modern dorms I've seen built are this pod kind of format where you live in this community space and it's shared amenities. Sometimes you get to share cool things like a kitchen and stuff like that so you can prepare your own food. Other times, none of that, right? These really old school ones, you even share shower stuff, like you walk down the hall and then there's the open shower room and you go in.
That was my college.
Oh, that was your college. Okay. That was what it was like for me in the Army, right? Yeah. Everywhere you'd go for training or whatever, you'd have your barrack style stuff. Sometimes it'd be open bay stuff. Sometimes you'd have little isolated rooms and stuff like that. But
yeah, my college
shared showers.
We had suite style, which came later on, which is what you're talking about, the pods where you have multiple rooms within a suite, and you have a common room and a kitchen. And like you said, typically 2 rooms share 1 shower. But we also had the old school dorms where we had the really old school dorms where it was 2 people per room, but the room didn't have a bathroom or a kitchen. It just had 2 beds, and that was pretty much it. I think you had a sink to brush your teeth where you didn't have to go to the community showers. But then we also had ones that they also had, it was 2 people to a room. It was just one big room that didn't have any sectional divide or anything like that, but it had a bathroom in there. So you at least shared a bathroom with one other person. It wasn't the community side. But yeah, I've seen all 3 of those variations of dorms.
So visiting other places, like I visited one college that I used to go to baseball camp to when I was in college, and they had the old school style where, you shared a bunk room and there was nothing in there other than cement block walls. You had to walk down the hall to the bathroom. You had to walk down the hall to the showers. And it was just, that was the most, I don't know, least comfortable of them all. And mine in college at least had, the bathroom inside the pod type area, right? And but today lots of times, some of these colleges provide students their own room with own bathroom amenities and everything like that. So it varies. It varies across the board. Now, some other options outside of the dorm, I'll say this: lots of colleges buy houses, or buy at least complexes type thing that are kind of like houses, whether they're brookstones or what, not brookstone, brownstones or things like that, right? That are townhomes or something like that you live in. Sometimes you live in a group scenario. Sometimes you have one room in the house and it's kind of like an apartment type scenario. That's pretty common too.
Yeah, you also have to, depending on like, it typically happens more on the graduate side, but you usually have like married houses too. So if you come in as a married couple, then they'd have housing specifically for that, which is an option, which is, not much different.
Yeah. And one thing I'll say, colleges are going to vary so much in terms of what they have to offer. That's one thing you need to, when you're scouting out colleges and you're thinking whether you want to go there, that's going to be a huge consideration, because for all the time you spend in class, you are going to spend more time than that outside of class, right? Doing your studying in your room, in your dorm, in your apartment, that type of thing. So you need to weigh that, all of those considerations as options. And that's why I mentioned earlier that, early on, this is going to be one consideration that's going to weigh more than that same consideration will weigh later on. But most colleges do have the ability for you to stay in the dorms throughout your college experience.
Yeah, and I would venture to say most of the old school colleges that have those kind of outdated dorms are updating them as we speak. I know a lot of them are going through that right now.
Oh, yeah.
Well, when it comes to choosing, if you really have the choice to choose to live on campus or off campus, sometimes the choice is actually made for you, especially if you're an incoming freshman. Some colleges require students to live on campus, usually for at least like 1 year. If they fall into this category, or if they fall I guess, into the requirements that you have to live on campus. I do know a lot of campuses, they say if you live within a certain mileage radius around from the campus, then you have to live on campus for your first year. If you live within that radius, obviously you're probably going to live with your parents. So
right, and some of them grant exemptions for students who are from that area, right? So you're not going to make somebody live in the dorms if they grew up right down the road, like yourself, right?
Yep.
That would honestly be inducing a cost that otherwise you wouldn't have had to pay. So yeah. So again, those are all things you're going to run into, regulations that the school has about living in the dorms versus off. I think there are some colleges that make you live on campus all 4 years.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Yeah, without special exception. So with that being said, you're going to have to research and see what your college offers and what are your options in that regard. I guess the value that we can bring then is just to say that you need to consider this strongly, but also to give some pluses and minuses that we've seen, right? Things that we ran into living on campus versus off.
Perfect segue, because the next thing we're going to talk about, let's talk about the things to consider when it comes to choosing, if you have the choice, to live on campus versus live off campus. So we've got about 6 things on here that we would like to discuss the pros and cons of on both sides, living on and living off campus. And the first one, I think the most obvious one to everyone, is the location. I mean, living on campus is on campus. Living off campus is off campus. So there's going to be a difference between the location side of it. So what do you think about that in terms of choosing? Like, what's some factors in the location that you would think of when you're choosing?
Well, just like going to work, right? I mean, I think everybody's experiencing right now the aspect of not having to travel places because everything's online, right? You live on campus, you may not have to drive in. It may be walking distance. You may be closer to not just a class, but other things, library, um, food hall if you eat, at the campus cafeteria type thing. Any of these factors, you're just going to be closer to everything. On the entertainment side, right? You'll be closer to that as well, and we'll talk about the benefits, downfalls of the whole entertainment aspect as well. But just convenience, right? You're going to be closer to the things that you're interested in. Downside, you're going to be closer to the things that you're
not
interested in or not interested in, right? And it's going to be busier normally, right? You're going to be around more people. An introvert might find that just,
miserable,
right? Because they're around people all the time, and they can never find alone time. People who need that open, free space and stuff like that. So you have, in a sense, a little less autonomy in terms of your own time, your own space, all that kind of stuff. So while it can be awesome in terms of fun things and fun in terms of doing what you're there to do at school, going to class, things like that, it can also be a distraction.
Yeah, I'll give you an example of mine because, like I said, I lived with my parents for 3 of the 4 years that I went to what am I saying? 3 of the 5 years that I went to college. And I remember I would go on campus because a lot of my friends were on campus, especially, again, I was playing soccer, so a lot of the athletes lived on campus. And we would go and we would be doing something, or we would have practice, and right afterwards they go, oh, we're going to go to the bar, we're going to go to this place, whatever. And they all went right to their dorms, took a shower real quick, and they were ready. I had to drive 20 to 25 minutes to my house, then take a shower, and then drive 20, 25 minutes back just to meet them. And it became almost laborious just to have to go through the point of getting ready when they all have their stuff there. And that was one thing that was one of the reasons why I made the idiotic decision to go live in a house, rent a house while I was living in the same city as my parents, which was stupid, waste of money looking back. But I liked it because it was close to campus. So anytime we were doing something, I could run to my house real quick, take a shower, come back, and it was, 10 minutes. It wasn't an hour round trip.
Well, convenience is a huge deal like that. Also, just, in the same regard, if you perhaps didn't have the best relationship with your parents or wanted to escape or something like that, you might pay the price just to be on campus just so you'd have that convenience and have this separation, right, from your daily life. Because I will say this, college is one of those things, people on commuter campuses and things like that, they kind of blend college into their normal lives. For me, I stepped out of my normal life and stepped into a college bubble. And that was my entire life. And I made it that way. And it made it easier that way, because if I had to balance the life that I had before I went to college, managing old friends, managing still the things that I did all the time as my daily activities and stuff, it would have been extremely difficult. Honestly, I've talked so much about college being this thing that can allow you to develop as a person and all that kind of stuff. Well, honestly, how you approach college, whether you live on campus, whether you get into that bubble, whether you really get involved with your classes, your program, make connections with clubs and friends and well, I don't know about family, but friends and your professors and things like that, and just really getting ingrained into what you do. Like, I became so obsessed with what I was doing and what I studied. Back then, they didn't have many wireless headphones like with Bluetooth and things like that, but I bought these headphones that transmitted over like radio wave. You plug it into the TV.
Well, you're dating yourself, aren't you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I watched Spanish television all the time. I never watched anything else but Spanish television because I wanted to hear the language, get indoctrinated in the culture and aspects like that. So even when I was off campus, I was still trying to live what I was studying. I would go to my professors' offices and hang out with them after class for hours on end.
I wish I had a button that would just say nerd alert.
Oh, yeah. I was a complete nerd, but I fell into what I liked so much. And, one of my best friends in college was a music major. And I became enveloped in his life as well in the music center, where some of these students lived in the practice rooms. I mean, they slept in the practice rooms. They would practice their piano 6, 8, 10 hours a day on top of class, right? And I would go to all the performances. I could hang out and stuff because I was such a fan of music and stuff like that. So anyway, college can be it can be a whole new life. It can be your entire life. Or it can be the way you blend your existing life in there. And part of where you live and the accommodations that you would choose, whether it's, living in a house, living in an apartment by yourself with other people, what type of dorm you live in, what the college offers and things like that, all goes into what makes your college experience.
Yeah. Yeah, and just hearing you talk about it, there's no question, I think listeners can hear this too, but there's a lot of passion that you have when it comes to the school side of school. Not the play side, but the school side. And it's resonated back when you were in college to all the way to this point. You still have that passion. And I have passions for stuff, but it's not necessarily the school part of it. When we talk about those episodes, or we talk in those episodes, you'll probably hear that a little bit more too.
Yeah, and you and I now, and I can say this honestly, I have a ton of passion, and I wish the college that you and I taught at was more of an on-campus type school. Yeah. But we have a huge percentage of our population are commuters, type scenario. So it doesn't leave as much room for that whole, the college being your entire life, that it just enveloping everything about you, that, you live on campus, you do everything on campus, your life is that type scenario. And I will say this, I had to balance that with work. If I had the option, I would have made college my entire life. I wouldn't have balanced work along with it. Right. Yeah. But again, we've got a completely different episode. If you guys haven't checked that out, that whole work-life balance, check it out, because we talk about some, pretty good topics in there. So this runs in that same vein of things you have to consider when you say, what is your college experience going to be?
All right, let's talk about the next thing that you should probably consider when it comes to choosing to live on campus versus off campus. And that is just, I think we touched about it a little bit with the location, but the friends and connection side of it. Naturally, there's going to be a friends and connection side of it, especially if you're on campus.
Yeah. Well, I always look at it like this. I mean, how are you going to meet people? So there's classes, obviously, but, classes, you go in there, you sit beside each other silently most of the time. You interact with some group activity and stuff like that. But other than that, it's people are coming and going. It's very difficult. But you live amongst and around people, you start to be exposed to their social lives, the constant interaction with them, just passing them in the hallway type thing. So it expands beyond just the people you're living in that pod with, right? It expands to everybody within your dorm or within the dorms right beside each other and things like that. You're all walking towards class in the same direction and stuff. So people become familiar. You're going to see and ultimately meet more people and have more connections on campus. Now, for some people, right? Now, professionally, I think this is a great thing. You always try to meet people. You always try to network. If you're the type of person who that is not your jam, right? You are a loner. One thing I do know about introverts, right? Because I tend to be an introvert, is they care about the depth and strength of relationships. So they want friends.
Quality over quantity.
Yeah, right. But the people that they hold close, they hold them really close and really strong relationships. But you take somebody like my wife, who's a people person, she has hundreds of people who would genuinely call her a friend. But I would say most of those relationships are more ephemeral, right?
Yeah.
They'll come and go, and they're just not as in depth and stuff. So anyway, sometimes that on campus thing, can be a little overwhelming. You meet too many people, all of a sudden it causes you to shut down, right? It can be a negative, so you can't put as much quality time into developing the relationships you do have. But at the same time, right, you're going to have more opportunities to meet people if you're on campus. You're going to have more availability to go to the professor's office and things like that. Because I know everybody goes to college thinking, well, I'm going to meet the people around me, that type of thing. It's the non-traditional students who tend to think, well, no, I'll go talk to the professor rather than some of these kids, right? 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-old traditional students. But for anybody, right, your professors are there to not only be mentors to you, but in some way be friends to you,
Yeah,
right? To
absolutely.
and I think lots of times that's something that's missed by students, just because somebody's 20, 30, 40, 50 years older than you, right? So,
Well, I will say, and this brings up another thing we didn't touch on when we were talking about the options of living on and off campus, but it is certainly an option, and that's fraternity and sorority houses. You
yeah,
know,
we
we
didn't
didn't
talk about
mention
that at
that,
all.
and we talked about that in a previous episode about Greek life, but that is an option. And depending on where you go, the fraternity or sorority house may be on campus or it may be off campus. But that is the option, and again, that is another way that you're going to have that connection and that friendships. Most of the friendships that I got in college weren't from the classroom setting; they were from some sort of campus event, whether it be a fraternity party or sorority party, a athletic event, or something like that, or the bars. But that's where I got. I didn't get them from classes. So really, it is that when you're talking about living on campus, you do have that ability to make those relationships and those connections a little bit easier, and it's almost more passive if you're living on campus than you are off campus, because you actually have to make the effort to come on campus if you're living off campus. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And one thing in that same vein, I didn't think about it. These programs of study have specific houses dedicated. I opted to not be in the honors program dorms, as they call it, but sometimes they have just houses for these groups. There was a Hispanic studies house where you could live, and the rule was you spoke Spanish all the time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was very interesting. They have now, particularly in business programs, entrepreneurship houses or entrepreneurial houses where everybody's in there is working either individually or collectively on some form of startup venture, right? So, these types of living arrangements are, they're unique, and you have to look for what the college has, but there's something to consider.
Well, let's look at the next one. I think probably the next one is, I said location is probably the biggest one. The next one's probably the biggest one when it comes to the decision. If you have the decision, I should have read these a little bit closer. But the next one's costs. I mean, there's a cost. There's an opportunity cost for one over the other. And this typically plays a big part, because if you're going to live on campus, you're probably going to have extra costs on top of the cost of the dorm. Because a lot of times if you live in the dorm, you're going to have a meal plan.
Mm-hmm. And, oftentimes it's in some scenarios, students get it subsidized. So I don't want to say this across the board, but oftentimes on campus housing, because there's so many administrative expenses with keeping it up versus in the private market, it's expensive. Most dorms I've seen are more expensive than the equivalent level of housing outside of it. Right? But
Yes.
they do offer those benefits, right? There's maybe a front desk person to check things. So there's security, right? They've got these amenities there. Oftentimes your utilities are included and things like that. So the cost, right? You do need to compare it on an apples to apples basis. Like, what am I getting? Versus if I live off campus, am I having to pay all these secondary expenses, such as travel to campus, such as utilities, things like that. So, but when you compare it one to the other, sometimes living on campus is more expensive, right? So,
Yeah, you just mentioned the travel costs too. I mean, if you're living on campus, there's really not really a need for you to drive your car most of the time. You're
yeah,
probably going to be able to walk to it, or there's a bus system, and you're going to be able to save money there. Whereas if you're living off campus, you're naturally going to have gas to get there, among other things too. So it's costs beyond just the dormitory cost. It's food, it's travel, it's all that kind of stuff.
yeah. And at my college, you had to buy parking passes.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so did my grad school. We did too.
Yeah. So all of these are costs that add up because sometimes they're not cheap,
No,
right?
yeah, they're
So
absolutely the case.
so cost is going to be a huge one, right? Do the math, compare it apples to apples. Don't make the mistake of saying, "Oh, this looks per month like a better deal." It may not be.
Next one, of course, my favorite, entertainment. And you actually have the note next to it, and I love it. FOMO. FOMO is a real thing.
Yeah. All
Fear
right.
of
So
missing out.
a lot of your fun activities we know are going to happen on campus, right?
Yeah,
Right.
of
I mean,
course.
especially like your sports and stuff like that. That's generally going to be very local, but oftentimes your house parties, things like that. And we talk in a different video about the fun aspects of college partying, right? Drinking, that type of thing, how this mixes into your college
We
life.
actually have a couple more videos more episodes on that. So
Yeah. So, yeah. So I guess what we need to say in this regard is you're going to be closer to it on campus. It's going to be more tempting to you. Now, early on, and this is kind of what I meant by some variables matter more at different points in times. Early on, those things are going to be probably a big deal for you. You're not going to want to miss out on those things. That's why I put FOMO, or fear of missing out, right? Because these things are happening. You don't want to miss them. There you go. Okay. Sometimes those things become less important after you've done it for a while. So you're like, yeah, when I want to go to them, I'll drive in and I'll go to them, or I'll Uber or Lyft, whatever, public transportation, and get down there, that type of thing, on campus for it. So closeness, and that goes to geography again. But a lot of the things that are going to entertain you early on are on campus. A lot of the things that make life necessary that become a little more important later on, like working, outside experience, outside relationships, things like that, become more important later on in your college career. So being on campus be a little less important.
yeah, when I read this, there's a bunch of things that ran through my mind because I experienced this. Again, I lived off campus, and I know there's a lot of times where, again, I know when most of the entertainment side of college, when they have their events and stuff that are on campus, I knew when they were going to be. There's no question I knew because they typically publicized it in some way. So I knew it was there. But if I was there, it would have been a lot easier for me to get up and go to it than for me to go, okay, I've got to drive 25 hours to get there. I've got to drive 25 hours to get back home. It's really not worth it. And then I see it was probably one of the coolest things that they did or whatever. And I thought, man, I wish I'd have been there. That was one side of it. The other thing that came to mind when I saw this with entertainment is how many times the spontaneous parties arose. Like the spur of the moment, people getting together, whether it be a dorm hall party, a house party on campus, and it was the spur of the moment, and you didn't know about it. And all you see is pictures the next day, and you're like, man, what happened there? And they say, oh, yeah, it was just, we all got together, and it just happened. And all I could think of is, where was I? Well, I was at home because I was off campus.
Well, I'll tell you this, some of the most entertaining times I ever had were in the dorm, just on a routine night, right, in the common room out there, people doing everything. I remember I got fined in the dorm. We'll talk about rules and regulations in a minute, because we took golf balls in the hallway and were chipping down the hallway. But the far end hallway wall was made out of cinder block. So these golf balls, you do a little chip down the hallway and it bounced a couple times. All of a sudden it hit the wall. I don't know how physics makes this possible. It got faster coming back. So there's five of us in the hallway chipping down the hallway. We hit the wall and that thing comes back like a bullet. And so we're hitting the deck. And then all of a sudden this becomes a game, right? And, people got out there and we're rooting on it, type thing. So anyway, there was just on a random day, anything fun was capable of happening, right? And, that's outside of your traditional just house parties going, there's kegs, there's music, there's sports, there's all that kind of stuff. Just, sitting around playing video games, sitting around talking, things like that. It was just, there was a lot of entertainment, a lot of diversion from, your school life or your daily life and stuff like that, just by hanging out. So anyway, yeah.
My favorite memory, if we're going to bring up what we did in the dorms, because I hung out in the dorms. So in the dorm rooms, you have the mattresses. They're like these plastic thin mattresses.
Oh yeah, yeah.
We went slip and sliding on them down the dorm room hall, and just we would just haul boogie. We'd wet it was bad, but I don't suggest doing that to everyone. But it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the next one, which really feeds into that really well, which is rules and regulations, rules and restrictions. Obviously, on campus, you're going to have more rules and restrictions. Off campus, you're at your place. Whether you be renting it or you're living with your parents, you're at your place. So there's a lot less rules and restrictions. So how do you deal with that when it comes to choosing?
Well, to start with, things that kind of fall in line with college, everything from, partying, having people that stay over and spend the night with you, having alcohol. Lots of those things are prohibited in the dorm, right? You may not be able to have somebody to spend the night with you. You may not be able to have alcohol, Yeah, right. Even if you're old enough for it, it still may not be allowed. There may be curfews on time periods that you can be out in the public hallways and things like that. There may be limits on the hours that people can deliver food and stuff like that to the dorm. Everything from, can you do the things you want to do to enjoy yourself? The dorm's going to have a lot of regulations, right? School housing, on campus housing is going to have a lot of regulations versus, off campus, you got to do everything yourself, right? Your schedule's not set up for you. You have to plan how you want to. And are you more likely to perhaps, you know, not clean your room or leave things strewn about or have the 5-day-old pizza box sitting in the middle of the floor in your own apartment than you are in the dorm room where your dorms are routinely inspected? Yes, you are. So I would say just consider this. Look at the regulations, look at how you want to live your life, look at your tendencies, look at the time you have to do things and things like that, and say what matches up. If you need those rules, regulations, and uniformity, right, and the services that come along with it, because there's a lot of like common area cleaning and stuff like that that happens that the dorm does for you, right? Just take that into consideration.
Yeah, and I would almost argue it's taking them into consideration, but not necessarily matching it to what you're looking for, but also looking at it as helping your deficiencies. So I would look at it as I need those things because I'm bad at those things. I'm not good at the organization, the keeping things clean. So if I had to follow the rules, I'm more likely to do it. Whereas if I had an apartment on my own, I'm probably not going to do it. Even though that's probably my natural tendency is not to do it, I may need that rule to help me stay on top of things, to get things done, because it's going to help me in the long run learn how to do those, to have those skills and to keep up with things in later on in life.
Yeah. And, things like paying bills, right? You don't have to handle that in the dorm.
Those
you go off
are
campus,
awful.
you got to do it. What if you got to collect portions of rent from your roommates? What if you got to collect portions of utilities from your roommates?
Yeah.
I lived that. It was a nightmare, right? I mean,
Splitting groceries.
oh my gosh, it was, and cleaning up after yourself. Like, I was fine with things being strewn, but leaving nasty food in the kitchen, just laying around everywhere with ants and cockroaches and everything like that. Oh, it was terrible.
Did y'all play the adult version of Jenga where whoever made the trash fall was the one that had to take it out?
Oh no.
So who could stack it the tallest without making it fall, and whoever made it fall had to take it out?
Oh, if I ever let it get there, my roommates and I already had an argument brewing.
Oh
right?
boy, we'd have been fun roommates.
Oh yeah, no, I would have. I would have. Yeah, you and I would have had points of conflict if we waited to take the trash out till it was falling over.
I would have learned a lot though. So, last one, and I added this one because I think it's a very important one. Especially, it was one for me, and that was comfort level. Depending on depending on the style of dorm too, or depending on the place that you're living, your comfort level. Because for me, I'm somebody to be comfortable. I tend to be I'm more hot natured, so I like to be cooler. Whereas if somebody's more of the cooler nature and they would like to have a warmer temperature, it would really conflict with me, and it would I can't sleep in hot weather. Like I have to have the fan on.
Well, I always found dorms to be hot in the summer and hot in the winter.
Yes.
It was, it's just, they don't want people to get cold, right? Because that's a health threat. But gosh, they would keep it way too hot in terms of cooling the place down. So that is, comfort level, the ambient noise that's there. Because, those old cement block dorms that, I stayed in and that are still pretty common, noise travels like crazy through those walls. You hear everything.
Yeah, the good, bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, some people can't sleep. Luckily, I was somebody who could fall asleep during a rock concert, right? So, I didn't have that problem. But other people who couldn't sleep through that kind of noise, dorms were hard.
Well, one last thing we're going to talk about, and I think this is a really good one that you added here, and that is the possibility for RA job, residence assistance job, especially in your second year. That does add a whole lot of value for students to be able to get that position, although it is very hard to get. I mean, there's only a few of them.
Very hard to get. I mean, it's a job, right? But along with that job comes free housing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a huge benefit, right? It's not a taxed benefit to you. You just live there by virtue of your responsibilities. Now, you have to be the bad guy, You have to inspect other
yes, you
people's
do.
rooms, right? Tell them, like, hey, you can't have that liquor bottle in here, right? You can't be smoking that in here,
Yep.
right? Like, sorry, he or she's got to get out, right? That's not allowed here type scenario. So, you have to be the sheriff in a way, right? You're policing the neighborhood. But like I say, ton of benefits there. You meet a lot of people, right? You can connect with a larger group that way. Free housing, it adds more comfort because, you're in charge of inspecting yourself.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden,
Some
you
conflict of interest.
right, you selectively enforce the rules against yourself. I know I had an RA who would not let you have open alcohol or containers in the dorm. But if you went into his room, right, he
It's fair
opened
game.
it was, you looked in his closet. He had a full stash of everything he confiscated, right?
Do as I say, not as I do.
Exactly, right? So it was more, he just said, just don't let me see it type scenario. So, which probably would have gotten him fired at the time, but
That's
right.
something else we can bring up on the alcohol episode that we're going to be doing is how to get away with it. Probably not the best thing to do, talk about, but tips and tricks there too.
No, it's worth knowing. Particularly, as a lawyer, I've advised a lot of people on various scenarios in college about when the police show up, or what you get charged with. For everything from underage possession of alcohol or drugs to DUI to speeding and things like that. You need to know what the rules are.
Yep.
Right. And my advice is don't do anything that breaks the law. But, if there is a way to mitigate the consequences of making a bad decision, well, I want you to know that too.
Yep. Well, it's been a good episode. Honestly, I didn't think we were going to take 40 minutes, but it was a good episode to be able to go through all these things because I think it does help the listeners a lot understand what they need to consider when it comes to making that choice of living on or off campus.
Yeah. I mean, if I had it to do over again, I would have made some different decisions. I wish I had heard somebody have this conversation in front of me ahead of time. Hopefully our listeners feel the same way.
Hopefully. Well, it's been a great episode. Jason, you have any parting words before we head out?
Same thing as always. Guys, reach out to us. We're talking about the things that you want to hear about. So let us know what you want to hear about. It can be anything related to life, career, college, whatever. Send us a message on the website. Let us know. We'll talk about it.
Awesome. Well, until next time, we hope to see you there. Goodbye.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Reschool'd podcast. Be sure to head over to reschool'd.com for news and other information on things we're getting into.